Hey everyone, welcome to TrueNAS Tech Talk on Pi Day today, 3/14 of course. We won't bother recording this at, 1900 hours and 15 minutes, etc. But today we'll talk about the freshly released Fangtooth RC1, some of the new Incus functionality that we're targeting for the release build. Those pull requests just landed a few minutes ago. We're going to open a bit of a can of bees as Chris goes on a cryptocurrency rant. And we're going to try and stay ahead of some of the pile of viewer questions that continues to arrive. But I think we're going to have to try and devote a little bit more time to those, Chris. We're getting them, in quantity now.
Yeah, they're piling up. And again, nobody listens to our advice about keeping it short and sweet, and everybody wants a full episode out of their question. But hey, it's fine. We love it. We want all the content. Send it in. This is awesome. So keep them coming, but it is building up a queue.
We do have kind of some overlap in some of the technical areas, so maybe we can try and mesh them all together and say, this is in response to multiple viewer questions. We're going to dig into a particular issue. Lots of you still have questions about special VDEVs and L2ARC and how those things interact, so maybe it's worth doing a bit more of a really tech-heavy episode to pull those apart and tease out some of the details.
Yep. Just stay tuned for that. Future episode content is definitely coming your way. But keep the questions coming in the meantime. Again, short and sweet. We'll try and work them in, but if you got longer ones, we'll just schedule them where they make the most sense.
Absolutely. So, hey, we're a few days into RC1. That dropped on the 11th on Tuesday.
It did.
Yeah, we're seeing some pretty good uptake rates. Yeah. I don't think it's as massive as Electric Eel because everybody wanted to get in there for not just RAIDZ expansion, but Docker as well.
Hard to beat Docker at the end of the day. And that was the most desired thing by far on TrueNAS for now a couple of years. So it finally landed. And of course, that made records for Electric Eel. But hey, Fangtooth is still a respectable second place, not too far behind where Electric Eel was at this time and at the same pace.
Yeah.
So as far as the expected functionality, RC1, pretty darn smooth. We do have, of course, the tickets coming in around the experimental instances support. That's the Incus, VMs, LXC, all that good stuff, which we expected. That's why it is labeled experimental and has all the appropriate warnings when you go click into it in the UI. But the other side of the fence, basically everything else, it's a ghost town. We have very few issues coming in. So your Samba, your NFS, your iSCSI, even Docker-related stuff, pretty smooth sailing there. We're feeling pretty good about the overall release at this point. And of course, the Incus stuff, we're going to keep working on hacking. There's still a slew of little things that'll be trickling in over the next few weeks in preparation for the .0, which, speaking of the release, that is planned for tentatively April 15th-ish. We'll throw an ish on there, maybe a little asterisk. So we'll see. Depends on how the testing goes and if anything interesting comes in that requires a little more time and effort to get worked out. But as of the moment, we're about a month away exactly.
Yeah. And again, it's numbered 2504. For those who haven't figured it out again, that's year, month. So we do have the month of April. If, we're aiming for that 15th, kind of mid-month. But as Chris says, if we find something that would be a problem, we might have to slip a day or two. And if we were finished, maybe we'd slide a day or two the other way.
I have been asked too, would we ever rename it if it slipped, 2 weeks, for example, and fell into May or something? And the answer is no. I would still call it 2504 because that was the intended launch date. And, a slippage of a few weeks isn't worth renaming it and throwing the system off and confusing. And I'm kind of a pedantic engineer type, so tough.
Yeah. Well, it would be confusing to have everybody say, well, what happened to 2504? Now we have 2505.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll be one of those weird things that'll cause something to change. And, the more you change things, the more things can potentially go sideways. So
absolutely,
we would keep it named as 2504. And just on the idea of, experimental and tickets and things like that, I've seen a couple people say that, hey, I don't want all the extra things in scale. And the simple answer to that is, don't turn them on. I have several systems that I took from core to scale. They don't use Docker. They don't use apps. They don't use any of the virtualization pieces. They're just delivering, Samba shares, and they run just as fine as the core system did. So, just because these things are available in scale, it doesn't mean you have to use them. There's no, increased load on the machine if you're not enabling the Docker pieces or the apps, or any of that virtualization framework. If you want to use scale as just a plain old-fashioned, Samba share, it's going to work just as well as core.
Yeah, this is something I think people overlook or maybe just misunderstand, Chris, in general, is they see these options in the UI and assume, oh, well, that makes my system slower or it's eating resources. No, None of those things are turned on until you go enable them and start using them, just like you wouldn't turn on Samba if you don't have SMB shares, nor would you turn on iSCSI services if you're not planning on doing block. So it's the same way with Docker. It's the same way with Incus. Just because things are there, they're not utilizing any resources. They're not doing anything on your system until you explicitly go choose to enable them. So the worst thing you could say is they're eating up a little bit of disk space on your boot device, which, let's be honest, you probably have more than enough disk space, and that's not that big of a deal. What's a few hundred megabytes among friends? So
Exactly.
it's all good.
Exactly. So, hey, just landed this morning, as I mentioned, there's a couple more Incus changes that are going to be coming, aiming for inclusion in that 2504 full release. One of those has been a big request. It's support for multiple Incus pools. We're merging this, we're backporting in. The practical impact of this is that you'll be able to distribute your instances across multiple pools, depending on the performance or the capacity characteristics you want. It also means that you could place containers in specific locations if you want to take advantage of some of our data reduction features like block cloning, if you want to be able to alter, things like your compression level. And maybe even if you're being really experimental, you're going to use that fast deduplication, but make sure it's something you can leverage before you just turn that on blindly. And Absolutely. Then, of course, we're also working on some API support. That's to be able to, do a little bit more of, I won't say fully automated, but helpfully automated ingests of the current VMZ vols and other things like that into Incus volumes. We're trying to make it easy for, migrations to happen, potentially down the road, things like importing and exporting different virtual disk formats into those Incus volumes.
Yeah, that's important because in the back end today in the API, we do have support for being able to import, say, a VMDK or a QCOW file, and it'll convert it to raw and then put it on the ZVol. But then being able to take that ZVol and put it into the Incus native volume is important. That's the last step. So all those pieces got to land before eventually it shows up in the UI as a nice button you click and say, upload my VMDK, and it just does magic in the background.
Exactly. So again, we'll say, the instances feature is probably still experimental at this stage. There's going to be moving parts. There's going to be lots of changes, but we think in the long run, it's going to be something that's really valuable. People are going to start using quite a bit more. But it's one of those features. Like I said, there's going to be a bit of change. It's going to be exciting change, but just be prepared for a little bit of detail-oriented things that might be necessary to get yourself started.
Excellent. But yep, we're looking forward to it. Again, keep the comments coming, keep the feedback coming. We appreciate it. If you see problems or bugs, file them now. Please don't wait until like 2 days before the release. That's very non-optimal from our standpoint.
Yeah, I don't think you'll make the code freeze at that point, Chris.
Absolutely. So please, again, because I see folks on Reddit and people will post, oh, I was having difficulty with this or that. And it's like, just take the 10 seconds, click the button, file the ticket with the debug. That gives us at least a chance to analyze it and see if we can get a fix in, if it's not just an expectation or documentation problem. But again, we need to see that before we can make that determination.
Absolutely. Hey, wild theories and speculation time, Chris.
This is fun, and I enjoy this. This is just kind of, my nerd way of ranting or thinking about different things and wondering, and I'm completely open to the idea that I'm wrong on some things and right on others, and I think we all have that mix of, good predictions and bad. But in this one, it's something I've thought about a bit recently is kind of my theory on where cryptocurrency is going to go down the road. And my somewhat dark prediction is that I actually have a view that I think crypto could go to zero at some point in the not too distant future. And why do I say that?
The bear has left his cave.
That's right. That's right.
We are not going to the moon, folks.
Well, let's be real about it. Crypto, at the end of the day, as much as we like to say the dollar's fiat, and yes, it's just worthless paper, crypto is also just as much fiat. It has no intrinsic value apart from its math, and it's scarce, right? But at the end of the day, you can't eat it. You can't power a city off it. You can't really trade it in the sense of like it has nothing that is physical, right?
You can spend the power of a city generating it and maintaining it, certainly, which is maybe one of the other issues that people have.
You can. So what gives crypto its value, right? It's confidence. It's kind of like the stock market in that way. It's confidence. And will this go up? Does it have value? It's the same thing with crypto, right? It's really about consumer confidence. And do I have belief that this thing is going to have value and retain value for the long term? Well, I'm convinced, and more increasingly convinced, that as technology marches forward, it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when something happens high profile in the crypto industry, which makes that value drop to zero because the confidence goes away. So one of the possible ways this could happen is we're seeing a pretty rapid advance in quantum computing. Okay. And I'm convinced that could be one of the things, again, may not be the thing that eventually causes the house of cards to collapse. So again, it's all confidence. That confidence is what drives up demand. And the moment that confidence is shaken, for whatever reason, the value drops immediately. How bad? To zero? I don't know. Could be bad. Could be all the way to nothing. But who's to say, with the rise of additional computing resources and quantum computing, we don't see some sort of oops moment or breakage of something that attacks the blockchain itself, or RSA, for example. I know current cryptography, there's a lot of folks working hard on coming up with quantum safe crypto, kind of next generation cryptography. But most technologies, I don't know about you guys, if you've ever noticed this trend, but they take a while to shake out and kind of work out all the bugs.
Just a little bit might be just relevant to an earlier conversation we just had.
You might almost say some of those could be labeled experimental for some time.
Absolutely. And one of the core things about this is that hypothetically, if somebody creates a couple quantum chips and they say, oops, we just broke RSA or some other currently used cryptographic standard, well, you didn't just break it going forward. You've broken everything historically. So if somebody managed to get their hands on, an old wallet file of somebody else's, hey, if it was your own wallet file and you forgot the passphrase, that might be great news for you if you can crack that password before somebody else does. But if somebody else has managed to grab a copy of your wallet file, if you had been emailing things that were previously encrypted with that now broken encryption, and somebody decided to just WireGuard or Wireshark all of your traffic and hoover down all that encrypted thing, well, those cryptographic breaks go back historically. So it might be a whole bunch of people's data hanging out there in the breeze. So,
and that's kind of my point, though. It doesn't take a whole bunch of people. It only takes a couple or one, right, to shake the confidence engine, because that's key. The value is based on confidence. And, okay, so we'll just say hypothetically, some of the mainstream cryptos do switch to better algorithms that are harder to break. Let's be honest, there's a gazillion cryptos out there, and not all of them are going to switch in time or will switch ever. And it's going to start happening. You'll see some breakages. You'll see some people, lose their life savings or lose their cryptocurrency. That's going to be tough to recover from a confidence standpoint, because again, your average investor doesn't really know or care about the nuances about how it works in the back end. They just know that their friend down the street or someone they've heard of lost everything.
Yeah.
That's hard to recover from. Not everyone's going to be a nerd like us.
Yeah. I mean, that's how kind of a lot of the current confidence crypto scams happen right now, is somebody doesn't know too much about it. They just know number go up, and they, invest into some meme coin that turns out to be getting manipulated behind the scenes. It's a pump and dump, and they lose all of their money that way. But this is like something that's much, much more fundamental. If you say that at the core of it, the encryption technology is broken, and, putting your money here is basically the same as everybody throws it in a pile on the table and turns around. Well, there goes the confidence, there go your investors, and with that, there goes your price.
Right? Like you said, it's a scary thing. It hasn't happened yet, but again, the prediction I'm making is I think it's a matter of if, not when. Or excuse me, when, not if. See, the dyslexia kicking in again there.
Yeah, it's kind of like the change in, traditional password attacks that came about with things like, Hashcat running on GPUs, because, boy, the GPUs are not just good for video games, they're good at those really, really parallel workloads, like trying to crack passwords. So when we went from, 4 or 6 or 8 core CPUs to 1,000 core parallel GPU processors, well, things accelerated pretty rapidly. And quantum computing could represent a similar shift for encryption attacks.
It just means there's going to be that rough period in between where things need to shake out, and there's going to be issues with old algorithms, and new algorithms aren't quite all the way baked and have issues. And again, it's a confidence thing. As soon as you have one or two high profile breaks, the jig's up.
Right? Wi-Fi, for example, how many times did we go from, open to WEP to WPA to WPA2 to 3 to, continually evolving standards, and encryption is how you stay ahead of things.
How many DRM schemes have been broken?
Yeah.
Like almost all of them at this point. And yeah, sure, there's always a new one that comes out, but it does get broken eventually. And I happen to think crypto will fall in that same bucket at some point.
Okay. Editor, do not put any DCSS keys up on there. We will get our video rugged. Don't do that.
No, please don't do that. But anyway, kind of an aside, something interesting folks may not know is me and Chris were talking about beforehand is some people still think, well, yeah, but don't you guys partner with storage or StorJ? And aren't they using a blockchain for their network? And I was like, I guess most folks don't know this, but the answer is no. Folks have asked me this, and I guess I just assume people are paying attention and know this. The one piece that they do use is they will issue payments to node operators in Ethereum tokens. Okay, that's cool, but that's in no way connected to storing and retrieval of your data. That's not on a blockchain necessarily, and that could be replaced with any other payment mechanism at a moment's notice if they felt like they wanted to do so. Probably just convenient, and that's why they do it today. But that was actually one of the big reasons I loved their design when we were first looking at them and talking about partnering was that it was not blockchain based, unlike some of the competition. And I'm kind of, glancing at you, Filecoin. I have beef with Filecoin. But in the case of Filecoin, for example, it was a blockchain, and it was so inefficient because of that blockchain, it just looked unscalable. Turns out files are messy. I don't know if you guys have noticed, they tend to accumulate over time. So you can start off with millions and then billions and then trillions as you scale up. That's a lot of small file and metadata you got to keep track of. So Filecoin, by nature of having everything recorded in a blockchain ledger, has to work around this at a fundamental level by packing all these files into massive compressed archives because they only have so much space on the blockchain. I have to go look. I forget how many tens of gigabytes a day the blockchain grows on Filecoin, even with this scheme, because it was just ridiculous.
Exactly. And that's going to impact things like performance as well. Tying it back to TrueNAS, it's the idea of if you have tiny little files on something like a really wide RAIDZ, you're not going to get that space efficiency that you thought you were going to get. So you kind of hit a similar thing when you're trying to put lots of tiny little files. The way around it, as Filecoin, and as we suggest, is store bigger files there. It's adjusting the record size. I'm getting a little off track here, but what this basically means... It's the same
fundamental problem, though, right? It's about how do you keep those metadata costs down, and when your metadata costs are all being recorded on a blockchain ledger, holy crap, that ledger is going to explode because guess what? People like their files and they have tons of small files. So their answer, of course, was to pack them into these massive archives and then just take the checksum of that and record just the archive so you can try and keep that cost down. But it also means it kind of sucks for end users like us who want to go and just upload a file or retrieve a file. Because how often is it I need to restore everything versus I just need certain specific files, and now I got to pay the cost of retrieving this entire archive, unpack it. This gives me like bad flashbacks to tape technology where it's like I'm going to restore the whole thing so I don't know where the one file is I need, kind of thing.
Yeah, imagine a read, modify, write penalty, but you got to pay for each step of that.
Yeah.
It makes your, those single file-based uploads, they become difficult, they become costly. So, they would kind of work around that. I think they would usually put generic S3 compatible in front of that deep archive.
That's the irony is they would go and they'd run, MinIO or some S3 in front of the Filecoin, which means now as a provider, I'm having to store your data, the customer's data, multiple times. I have to store it once on disk in the Filecoin format. And then I also have to store it in S3 for as long as I think the user needs to be able to rsync or push the deltas, right? Or wants to retrieve a specific file. I'm having to make multiple copies of this data. Well, holy crap, talk about inefficient, right? Not great. StorJ doesn't have that issue, which is great.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like a lot better. And I mean, that's again why, like you said, you selected them. That's why we're working with StorJ. So, and again, but they have zero connection to that, blockchain as far as where your files are stored. So,
absolutely. Well, hopefully that cleared up a few things for folks. Actually, this will be interesting to watch the comments on YouTube if I get a bunch of the crypto bros like spamming the comments and stuff. You're wrong, Chris. And that's fine. I'm happy to be wrong. Prove me wrong, but I only have to be right once. You got to be right 100% of the time.
There is no TrueNAS coin. Anybody claiming there is and trying to say, buy in now, that's going to be a rug pull as well. So yeah, I think we're going to have to watch the comment section here for spam a bit, Chris.
You just ruined my next get rich quick scheme. There you go. Okay, fine. Yeah. I guess I'm putting TrueNAS coin on the back burner.
No altcoins.
There you go. Well, excellent. Well, that was a good conversation. Again, throw the hate or the love in the comments. This is one of those topics people have a lot of opinions and are passionate about, which I get, and we'll see what happens as time goes on. That's the only way to find out. But before we wrap up the show here, we do got to get through some of these backlog of questions here. So we'll start with our first one from George. Chris, we'll throw this to you, and then I got one coming up here in a second.
Yeah. All right.
Let's see here. You want me to read it for you?
Yeah, go ahead and ask me the question if I'm answering.
Hey, guys. Love the direction TrueNAS Scale is going after the TC chapter. Keen on using the expanded disk pool with the ability to add in a new and additional drive to a disk pool. But I have an outlier request. How about exploring the ability to remove a drive scenario? You've grown your pool to say 10 drives, but keep on having an issue with one drive. Instead of replacing the drive, could you have an option to remove the drive from the pool, allowing it to rebalance down to 9 drives until you can add a new drive again and expand again? It'd be great. Oh, man. RAIDZ expansion to reverse. Fun.
Oh, RAIDZ constriction or RAIDZ removal. That one, it's been looked at in the back end of the code. And to say it is messy is definitely an understatement. I don't think such a thing is presently possible. I mean, we did say that about the expansion, but it's significantly more challenging based on the general behavior of ZFS that says, don't touch existing healthy data.
Yeah.
Even in the case where we said, hey, we have all the free space necessary, to make entire copies of all this data that somehow touched this, hypothetical 10th failing drive. It's really challenging because basically every time you're doing that, you're having to basically exclude that drive from the writes. There'd be major changes needed in that storage pool allocator. I'm not saying it's impossible to do. It's just, it would require fundamental overhauls in how space is allocated across the different, allocation pools and devices. It's
nothing's impossible, Chris. You can always do it given enough time and resource, right? But we like to talk about here internally. It's like, what's the ROI on that?
Yeah.
For how much effort it costs to go implement, test, make solid a function or feature to be able to shrink a pool by a drive at a time. What's the benefit? How many people are actually going to be using that, right? And if I have, a finite bucket of developer time and brain power and money and testing time and all that good stuff, do you go put that into some shiny new ZFS feature, which would be enjoyed by, 80, 90% of the users? Or do you put it into a feature that, 5 people want to use over the next year? So that's a tough call. Like I said, not that it's impossible, but one of the beautiful things, if you don't mind my little soapbox here for a second, Chris, is open source allows you to hack on things. I don't know if you guys are aware of this. I just thought I'd mention that. That is kind of a closely guarded secret. If you have an itch to scratch it.
Yeah.
If that feature is worth a ton of effort to you, go make it happen. Either hire someone, pay someone to do it, or do it yourself.
Yeah.
And then submit the code, and we'll take it. We'll take a look.
Even if it's a case of you're not sure about it, if you get the ball rolling and that just might be what happens is if you overcome that initial inertia of you say, hey, I've started this project and you make a little bit of ground, you might get some interested parties that go, I've been hoping for this too. I'm going to help you out now that I know I'm not alone, shouting into the void. As soon as you have half a dozen people who say, hey, we want to make some concerted effort to push this feature forward, suddenly you're going to get an awful lot of traction and you'll say, hey, this works. This is going to happen.
There are a ton of bolted on and features that you could look at from open source projects all over the place where it was literally started by one person with an itch. They just said, oh, wouldn't it be nice if foo happened because I have some unique use case, and they implement it and it ends up landing in the product. Doesn't mean it ever becomes popular, but it's there. Right. Yeah. And so that's the point is if it's something that's worth a lot to you or you think it would be super valuable, again, there's ways to get that ball rolling, and you might find that, hey, there are another dozen people who do want to help with this feature and it takes off.
I'm thinking on this one and just saying there's probably some structure that already exists. And if you wanted to look into this, start by looking at the VDEV removal code. That does exist right now. It requires you to remove entire VDEVs, not drives. but the key to it is it only works with mirrors. So let's, I would start there with a scenario saying what prevents this with working with RAIDZ, and say, step one would be enable the removal of, a mirror VDEV and flowing its data onto a RAIDZ. Well, suddenly you've solved the issue of how do I flow data onto an arbitrarily wide RAIDZ. Now you say, okay, if I can do this, how would I remove some data and pretend to reflow it back into a, N-1 wide RAIDZ? Little baby steps. Like I say, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. And that's how we'd look at approaching a feature like this. But as Kris says, it's about that return on investment. That's not a dollars thing. It's about, time invested and how many people are going to use this feature. So, but hey, great question. I mean, I'm already starting to think on it, George. The wheels are turning up here of going, okay, how would I implement this? So I don't know. Keep an eye on the pull requests. I might do something silly.
It might be even just talking about it here gets some people interested and says, oh, I want to see if I can do that. Some people just do it for the love of the game. It's an interesting technical problem. I might go see if I can make that happen. Great. Find your tribe.
Exactly.
Go see if you can make some magic happen. And again, it's open source. Open up pull request.
Do wild things.
How stuff
Go
happens.
Out there and hack.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay.
Question now for you, Kris. Let's turn it around. And this one is sort of a bit more business level. So you get to handle this one. He says it's from Nicholas, who says, what were the deciding reasons to go with Docker over Podman in TrueNAS when we did that migration?
So back, what was it? Beginning of last year early 2024, when we were looking at what do we do post Kubernetes, right? Obviously, the requests have been coming in left and right. Docker, Docker, Docker. We want Docker. But we did take some time and seriously go look at Podman. So it wasn't like we were just oblivious to the fact that this Podman thing existed. We went and took a look, and it was cool. It was neat. It had some pros. But at the end of the day, we ultimately decided Docker is just kind of the industry standard. Everybody understands that. It's well understood. And there was some worry that if we went with, say, Podman, then the very next thing that comes up is, why did you not pick Docker? Docker's the thing everyone understands. It just works, and now I got to learn a new thing. Again, not that Podman's not cool. I think I've ranted on this in previous episodes about how when we moved to Linux, we have kind of the opposite problem we did on BSD, which BSD, it was like you had one tool or you had none, depending on what the feature was you wanted, but you had one tool and that was it, and you had no choices. You go to Linux and it's like, now I got the embarrassment of riches and I don't know which tool to pick because there's so many different options. It's just so much larger of a community, more vibrant, more developments happening. And so there's a lot of times multiple ways to solve the same problem. And so you got to make a tough call and say, well, which one do we like in this particular instance? I don't just have the in-kernel NFS. I also have NFS Ganesha out there. Okay. FreeBSD, we didn't have that luxury as a parent. But anyway, same thing with Docker, same thing with Podman. We just took a look. And at the end of the day, we said, you know what? The community has been asking for Docker by name. The people asking for Podman was very small in comparison. Not that it's not cool, not that it doesn't have some cool bells and whistles, but we figured we would go with what the consensus was here, which is Docker is the de facto. It's what everyone kind of groks and understands. It's in the zeitgeist, if you will. We didn't want to go deviate from that and end up in a situation where people are now saying, oh, we really wish you'd pick Docker instead because Podman has this nuance or that lack of whatever.
Yeah. Well, hey, once, maybe Podman can run in an instance, you can set it up in an LXC container.
Absolutely, it can. Part of the reason for doing LXC is to be able to enable you to go run whatever the shiny new tool of the week is. And not that they're not cool, they're not awesome. Again, if you love Podman, by all means, go throw it in an LXC environment and have at it. If you want to run Kubernetes, throw it in the environment and have at it. If you want to do something more exotic, go for it. Run console. I think console's pretty cool. There's some other really neat software out there that allows you to do all kinds of container orchestration or just a variety of different workflows. That's why you have apps on TrueNAS, because there's a gazillion different things people like to run. Not everything's suitable for everybody. We have to be very picky about what we're going to take and put, again, return on investment into the main product and support and battle test and make, enterprise worthy and all that good stuff. Docker was the wise choice there.
All right.
Okay. So hopefully that answers your question.
Good question though, Nicholas. We like both the technical and the business side questions, and we try and pick and choose a little bit of each of those. We have been asked several times. I'll have to find the gentleman's comment and get our editor to put it up on screen, but we have been asked multiple times about having hour-long shows. I guess the good news is we've already done that. Just to skip a week, listen to 2 episodes back to back, and you've got an hour there roughly on average. So you're welcome for that.
That's awesome. Simple solutions.
In all seriousness,
the same episode twice. We don't mind the extra view. It's cool.
Yeah, catch all the little in jokes we throw in there. In all serious though, a 1 hour episode is a lot larger commitment to ramp up to. We're not sure how much of our audience would want to stick around for a full hour. Not that we can't do it at some point. It's just, I don't think it's something that we're going to tackle right at this moment, Chris.
Yeah. And one of the cool things we did on this show, and we decided early on in the format, is if you notice, we don't have a set time. Some episodes are shorter, some are a little longer. That was very intentional. We have the freedom to say, hey, if we're on a roll or have a really deep topic or we're interviewing someone that needs to go longer, guess what? It will. Other weeks where it's like, yeah, I have 30 minutes of content, and what do you want me to do? Just pad it? I mean, we could add ads to it, I suppose.
This podcast is sponsored by TrueNAS.
That's right.
Of course.
We have options, but at the end of the day, we're trying to be a little bit more flexible with the format. Hopefully that way every minute is interesting and engaging for you as a listener or watcher.
Exactly.
If you're on YouTube.
Listener, watcher, we are on more podcast platforms. I think we're trying to get onto additional ones. I think Apple podcasting we're trying to get on.
They will trickle out. We'll get onto more, but Spotify's there now too. If you want to listen to audio, which they do video as well, but that's my preferred go-to in the car.
Absolutely.
It's nice to have the options.
So just as a heads up about skipping a week. So I will be out next week doing some traveling, unfortunately. So we will be taking a brief week off. We will be back the following week. So that's going to be the 28th of March with a bunch more TrueNAS news and some related content. So please keep the questions coming in. Keep sending them in to t3@truenas.com. Drop your message in the comments section below. Find us on the forums.truenas.com. Send them in there, post them in reply to one of our announcement threads where we announce our podcast. Don't forget to, of course, like the video, subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. Continue to give us, other messages, feedback in the comment section below, but not about your new crypto coin.
And we invited it, didn't we? Here it goes.
We did kind of ask for it. And we'll see you next time.
See you in a few weeks.